Jesus is a game changer. No question about it. Good morning, everybody. And those of you watching us online, we're glad you're here. Wishing you were here, actually. But y'all are good. You look good so far. Help me out. So if you were going to launch a worldwide enterprise, how would you do that? One of the oldest American corporations to ever go global was Coca-Cola. It was established in 1886 in Columbus, Georgia. And then over the next 75 years, it became a multinational corporation. It's hard to go pretty much any place on planet Earth where you can't get a Coke. Other multinational corporations that have established pretty strong reputations for themselves. For example, in 1940, it was McDonald's. And then between 40 and 04, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Facebook. And you can probably think of some others. But by far, not even close, there is not a close second. The oldest and probably best known worldwide organization was established in 28 AD. The Church of Jesus Christ was established when he assembled a small team of apprentices, and in Matthew 16, he said to them, "One of these days I'm going to build my church." Now the word that he used was ecclesia. It simply means an assembly, something like this. But then he said, there is absolutely nothing in this world that will ever be successful against the ecclesia, the assembly. Now let me tell you something. I have studied the first 25 or 30 years of the history of that church. You can read about it in the book of Acts. Pretty much given my entire professional life to it, and the priorities of that church still motivate and inspire me. Hopefully they do you too. First of all, maybe you remember the commissioning service. Y'all know what a commissioning is? When you send people out to go do something big or small. We call it the Great Commission for a good reason. Jesus said, "Go and make disciples." I want you to pay close attention to the highlighted parts of these verses. "Go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you." And similar words from Jesus in the book of Acts. He says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere. In Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." Now, I can promise you that when Jesus said words like, all nations, everywhere, to the ends of the earth, it was not nearly as scary for those people as it is for us. Because 2,000 years ago, the ends of the earth meant about as far as you could see. That was it. They didn't have a map. They certainly didn't have a map that could explain to them the massive size of planet Earth. Now go back to the map. Right there is where they were. That's it. 120 people prepared to establish something that could someday impact the whole world. That's pretty scary. But look at this. They never had an opportunity to see a picture like this. And right there, in a small country about the size of New Jersey, is where it all started. And look at each other. Here we are, still. This worldwide enterprise. Nobody could have imagined what that first generation group of Jesus followers, what would happen when they started walking into their future. And nobody was dreaming in those days that a long time after that, there would be a small group of German immigrants who would start a church on the corner of St. Mark's Church Road before there was a road. I've got some great friends from Chicago, and the first time they were ever here to visit us, he said, Bob, I don't understand. So was the road named after the church or the church named after the road? And I said, my friend, this church was here a long time before there were roads. In his book called Forgotten God, Francis Chan writes, when I read the book of Acts, I see the church as an unstoppable force. The church was powerful, spreading like wildfire, not because of clever planning, but by a movement of the Spirit of God. Riots, torture, poverty, or any other type of persecution could not stop it. And then he says, isn't that the type of church movement we all long to be a part of? Now, the answer to that is probably no, not sure. That's why we're doing this series. Do you ever bump into somebody and when they find out you're a Jesus follower, they say, I hate that guy. I hate Jesus. You ever hear that? I talk to people all the time about Jesus. Sometimes they'll say, well, I don't know much about him, or they'll say, a long time ago when I was a kid, I attended church and Jesus seemed to be a pretty cool guy, but he did some cool things. Other people will say, I had a relationship with Jesus, but it's been a long time ago, and then I went to college and I took a couple of introductory religion classes, and the professors told me, they said, look, you can't believe everything they told you in a Sunday school class when you were a kid, so I started having some doubts about it. Or someone might say, yeah, I went through a horrible time several years ago, and I had a bunch of Jesus people were praying for me, but nothing ever happened and nothing changed, so I gave up on that Jesus guy. But so far, not one time in my life has anybody ever said, I basically hate Jesus. Just about everybody likes him. Even the people who have a lot of questions about the stories of Jesus in the Bible. When you read the scriptures, it's very hard to come to the conclusion that Jesus was somebody that you just like to hate. I meet Elon students. Sometimes they're here for the first time. Maybe they're freshman year. Maybe they show up here for church, or it could be one of our first-year football players. And maybe we'll get together for coffee or dinner, and sometimes they tell me they'll tell a story about growing up in a home where their parents were atheists, agnostics. But I've never met a college student, not yet at least, who said, my agnostic parents hate Jesus, and they told me that he can't be trusted. I just don't hear that. Sometimes these 18-year-olds were cautioned, and they said, you got to be careful about those people who claim to love Jesus and follow Jesus. But I'm telling you, almost nobody hates Jesus. Even a handful of Jewish and Muslim friends that I have, they will admit that they admire Jesus. They admire him for his amazing character and this compelling charisma, his transcendent values, and some of the inspirational moral lessons. And then, there's always that group of people, and I don't know who they are, I've never met one, but they say that they claim that they have received these subliminal messages like in a piece of toast, or maybe in the clouds. Now, can y'all figure? What about in a frying pan? Or in a tortilla? Now let me tell you, you gotta seriously have a broad imagination to say, I think Jesus was speaking to me through that tortilla. So what's the problem? The problem certainly doesn't have anything to do with the movement that Jesus started when he told his disciples. He said, one of these days I'll build my church, and together what we're going to do is transform the world. We're going to do it one life at a time. The problem is not in the movement. The bigger challenge we have is that when humans got their hands around the movement, it didn't take us very long to turn it into a religion. And then it became a set of beliefs and a moral code for human behavior. And we were just hoping that if we could get all the dominoes lined up just right, then maybe we could impress God enough where God would give us a check mark. Religions always develop a checklist. And they say these are the things that you've got to do if you want to gain God's attention. And if you want his favor, what you've got to do is you've got to fine-tune your performance. Maybe God will be impressed. But where we go wrong is that we consistently miss the target. We talk about this all the time around here. Romans 3 verse 23 says, everyone has sinned and fallen short of God's standard. If your sermon notes say Romans 6:23, it's actually Romans 3:23, but 6:23 is worth you reading. So for slightly more than 2,000 years, this worldwide enterprise, the church, has continued to give Jesus a bad name. We scar his reputation. We misrepresent his plans and purposes and priorities for the world. There are thousands of people who live in this community, and some are your family members, some are your neighbors. Maybe they attend your school, they play on your same sports team. You might work together in the same company. You could live on the same street, maybe work out at the same gym, enjoy the same restaurants, watch the same television shows, shop on Amazon. But somewhere along the way, we did not represent the real Jesus with authenticity and with accuracy. So now there are a lot of people who are confused about the Jesus that they see in us. And when it doesn't add up to the Jesus that they meet on the pages of the New Testament narratives, they get very concerned and confused about that. Take a look at this list. Evangelical biblical Christians, Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholics, mainline denominations, non-denominational churches, none of the above. Okay. This is a rhetorical question, but which one of those do you think is growing the fastest in our world today? None of the above. The nuns. The answer is the nuns. This is the fastest growing group in the United States today. If you say to them, do you have any faith background? None. Do you believe in anything spiritual? None. They are the nuns. And that group is growing very fast. They don't have any particular spiritual beliefs at all. Now, see if you can wrap your head around this. Why do you suppose that in our day, when the world is kind of cocked sideways, we've got pandemics and unparalleled political bitterness and animosity, there's racial disparity, mass shootings, there are these crazy crises headlines populating our daily news reports, and why are people ignoring God then in record numbers? Especially among the generation of the nuns, largely under 30, who are pretty soon going to be leaders in every area of American life. We're trying to figure that out. So welcome to St. Mark's Church. This is a spring, partway through the summer preaching series, and hopefully this is at least going to inspire us to take a deep breath and take a pause and sit up and look around and take notice and see if we can come to some agreement that the real Jesus is greater than any religion. One of the prayers that I've been praying for decades is really simple. God, do not let me misrepresent Jesus. I've said it a bunch of times. I never want to embarrass Jesus or tarnish his reputation. I hope you feel the same. Jesus said some amazing things. And some of those things give us a lot of encouragement and comfort and hope for the future. For example, he told a small group of commercial fishermen, he said, if you guys will follow me and watch me and listen to me and model what I tell you to do, one of these days we're going to start fishing for people and we'll change the world. He once told a very elite religious leader, this guy was one of the head dudes in all of Israel, and he said, look, I've not come to add more things to, you've already got a long, exhaustive list, a to-do list of religious demands. That's not why I'm here. I've come to show you how to be born again. He told a woman with a checkered past that her sins were forgiven, that her chains were broken, but that she should leave behind her reckless life of infidelity. He promised that the world would sit up and take notice if we love each other with an outrageous kind of love that the world almost never sees. He said that this world would have its share of trouble, but that he has already destroyed the potential of trouble destroying us. He said that when we get marginalized, when the name of Jesus or when Jesus' people get marginalized and ostracized because we stand with Jesus, the Spirit of God will stand with us and will give us confidence. He said that he would never leave us stranded or alone, that he came to give us life, and that one day he would die as a ransom payment for our sin debt. He said that he had come to do for us what we could never do for ourselves in 100 lifetimes. How many times did Jesus say, I've got your back? Quite frankly, he had our front too, didn't he? And he said, if you trust me, I will give you the confidence you need to live a strong, confident life, and you can have lasting impact. How many times did he tell somebody that he did not come to this planet to teach us how to chase the things of this world that promises us happiness and leads to nothing? He says, I've come to make you changers and not chasers after the next American dream. Jesus also said plenty of things that were awkward in his day and in ours too. Love your enemies. Love your competitors. Care about the people who are ahead of you. Turn the other cheek. Don't worry about getting even. You can't make God and money your top priorities in life, so you've got to choose. He said, don't worry about the things that you have that will rust, deteriorate, have to be replaced, or a thief could come in and steal, or things that will eventually wind up in a family auction, in the mother of all yard sales, or somewhere in a county landfill. He said, don't give your life to those things. Jesus also said that he was the one and only true path to God. I dare you to repeat that in the next progressive, inclusive community where you go every day, and people will look at you and say, there you go again, you intolerant Christians. Jesus had a moderate beginning. That was an understatement. Grew up in a small village. Nobody had ever heard of the town where he was born. It's Bethlehem in Judea, southern Israel. But he was destined to grow up. And in his late 20s, he started to confront the religious tradition. It was his tradition. And he confronted that tradition that had given direction to generations, thousands and thousands of people. And Jesus gave so much of his energy tirelessly for 3 years. He said, I'm going to teach you the true nature of God. And I'm going to teach you how to spread that message around the planet. And one day, some of that message will land at 1230 St. Mark's Church Road. I'm just curious. When you were a kid, did you sometimes learn more from your parents when you came to understand the things that they did not like? When I was probably about 13 or 14. We're sitting at the dinner table, 5 of us. My dad asked a simple question. And in that moment, something came over me. I don't know if I was having a teenage hormonal moment, or maybe my brain was disconnected from my body. But I've got a feeling probably I didn't understand it at the age of 14, but it was probably my sin nature coming out. But I gave him a really smart aleck response. I never did that again. I'm serious. Because I had to get up from my seat at the table and go into the adjoining room to retrieve my head when he knocked it off my shoulders. I got the message. My dad's been gone for almost 15 years. You know what? I don't remember if you said, what was your dad's favorite meal? I can't remember. What was his favorite television program? I don't remember. But I know what smart aleck responses would set him off. I do remember that. If you have a red letter Bible, you know, the red letters are the words of Jesus. Pay close attention to those statements in red. These are the words of Jesus. And they're not always nice and easy and friendly. And it was clear. Pretty much everybody knew when Jesus got frustrated. Now, I don't know if he knocked anybody's head off or not, but I'll tell you what, they knew. His generation understood that when Jesus started tampering with some of those religious traditions, it created all kinds of upheaval in his day. When he started to systematically dismantle those requirements, he was soon to be public enemy number one of religious traditions. Because what he had figured out is that typically religions build walls. Do you know what a wall is for? It keeps some people in and it keeps everybody else out. That's all. That's all a wall does. Jesus would frequently express his frustration and sometimes his anger at the insiders, the religious people, because they were giving God a bad name. It was the religious leaders that criticized Jesus for eating with sinners, for exposing their hypocrisy. So does it surprise anybody? It certainly doesn't surprise me that the greatest challenges that Jesus ever had came from religious people. And guess what? That's still true. Guess how many times somebody that doesn't believe in God or doesn't have a life-giving relationship with Jesus, guess how many times a person like that has sent me a hateful note or text or email? I'll let you know when I get one. Hasn't happened yet. But religious people, they've knocked me around pretty good because I started exposing their double standards. Or actually, the scriptures did. Now, one of the things that Jesus and I share in common is that we were both raised in a strong religious tradition, as many of you were. In fact, when you study the family tree of Jesus, you'll see that, it was a long line of religious people. These were godly men and women who were selected over the course of many generations to be leaders in this Jewish movement that was designed by God to someday change the world. That's why it gives me pause every now and then to stand in front of a mirror and wonder, is there anything going on in my life? Is there anything a part of my life that causes God to shake his head and say, Bob, come on, man, that's not a part of my plan. Why are you following that way? Why would you lead a church down that path? Bob, check your attitude at the door, man. The thing that bothers me the most about the attitudes that have crept their way into my life and into the life of the church over almost 50 years of ministry, what unravels me is that I have to take my share of responsibility for not giving a more powerful voice when I saw things that were getting sideways. Not for you insiders who have a misinformed version of the love of God when we fail to get it right now, but for the thousands of outsiders. So I decided last year in the fall of 2020, that sometime in this year, as I approach the final season of my vocational ministry, that I don't want to stop without addressing this one more time. Head on. Some of you know what it's like to have a parent, a son, a daughter, a coworker, a neighbor, a best friend, you name it. and you have never, we just did a whole series on this, that you've never been able to figure out how to break through their resistance or how to clarify their twisted understanding of God. The fact is, you never find Jesus. Can you think of a single time when he got in the face of a tax collector or a prostitute or someone who was poor or marginalized, someone who was unclean, the racial and ethnic outcasts, even the Romans who were occupying his beloved Israel, the outsiders? Can you think of a time? He was only frustrated and disappointed and angry with the insiders of his day because they had built a wall to keep the outsiders outside. And their attitude was, that's where you belong. You should live in my shoes for a while knowing that Jesus had a vision for the church that was established in his name. You should walk beside me sometime and try to understand that much of what we see happening in the church, especially the American church, is not it. I'm telling you, people are abandoning Christianity by thousands. That's why the nuns are growing exponentially. And what if the faith that they are jettisoning is not what Jesus gave his life for? So I want SMC to walk into the decades ahead with a clear vision of what the message is and how best we can be used to communicate that message in compelling and winsome ways. I hope that makes sense. Now, some of you who are on the insider list are going to struggle with this series. I understand that. And there's a chance that you're not going to shower me with high esteem and words of encouragement. I understand that too. But you know who will not get out of whack with this series? The people on the outside. This series is going to resonate with them big time, but only if some of us take the message outside where they are. If you've had a hard time following Jesus, or if you know somebody who has, and most of us do, and if it's because those of us who follow Jesus have done such a poor job at talking about who Jesus is and who he isn't, then I apologize to you. Because there's nothing in my heart that wants the people in this community to miss out on what we know. What upset Jesus more than anything else was when access to the Father was denied. When somebody on the inside did something that kept somebody on the outside from accessing God. And there's still some hope maybe that our 21st century church can get this right. Let's talk about access. Access. Susan and I have never been great, we're not big concert goers, but on occasion we'll go see a band who's maybe a band that's on tour or something. And on 3 or 4 maybe occasions, just a few, we've had special access to be able to engage with some of the members of the band. Once when Steve and Curtis Chapman sang here, right here, on our stage, and Matt Maher, who also performed here, we had a chance to spend time with both of them. Casting Crowns several years ago. Also years ago, we had backstage access with a concert given by Michael W. Smith. Now look, Michael is a good-looking dude. No question. So I'm backstage and I'm chatting with Michael. And I looked around and Susan was drooling. She didn't say a word. After we went back to our seats for the second part of the concert, I said, "You didn't say a word." She said, "I know." I was drooling. Let's just say that access did not mean the same thing to me as it did for her. The good news of the gospel is that Jesus came to give us total, complete access to the Father. Hardly a day goes by that you don't hear the word access. We've got all kind of safety precautions and security issues in our day. And for example, this is a key fob that would get you in and out of this church. Our staff, they have to, you've seen them carrying these things around their necks or in their pockets. And now, for all of you in this room under 30, this makes perfect sense to you, doesn't it? Absolutely. Key fobs are the way of the world. But I'm old enough to remember when I first became a pastor at St. Mark's Church, we didn't even lock that sanctuary over there. Because we didn't want access to be, we didn't want anybody who needed to stop by the church and maybe spend a little time with God or pray or whatever in a quiet space. We did not want to deny them access. Now you got to have a key fob and you got to have fingerprints and facial stuff and security codes and just the way of the world. Just for fun this week, because I knew I was going to be talking about the key fob, I asked Jarm, he's our executive pastor, I said, is the day coming when my key fob is going to stop working? And he said, well, we'll let it be a surprise. Most of us have an unlimited number of passwords. Those passwords give us access to every part of life. Access to the internet or the wireless network or our medical records or some classified information or our bank account. And of course, key fobs to unlock our car. We have access to roads and hallways and doors. If there's one word that can describe why Jesus came to this planet, it was access. He was here to give wide open access to God. Before Jesus, it was assumed that there was always going to be this mysterious distance between us and God, that God was there and we were there. But to have a personal key fob that granted us total access to the God of the universe, if you would have said that 2,000 years ago, they would have said, that's scandalous heresy. Remember that Jesus showed up to close the gap between the sin that had separated us from God. Access. Jesus said, you Pharisees and teachers of the law of Moses are in for trouble. Now those were the insiders. You're nothing but show-offs. You lock people out of the kingdom of heaven, you won't go in yourselves. And you keep others from going in. Can you think of anything that would frustrate Jesus more than if we were guilty of denying access to the Father? Let me illustrate that. One day, Jesus allowed his frustration and his anger just to boil over. He went into the temple area in Jerusalem and he noticed that there were buyers and sellers and they were trading and exchanging currency and all of that. And let's just say it sent Jesus right over the edge because he noticed that there were conniving merchants and cheaters and all kinds of people. And so buying and selling in the temple courtyard had become a tradition that had gone back hundreds of years. For example, people would arrive in Jerusalem and they would come there to perform one of the religious duties, for example, to maybe like Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, or the Passover, and they would need to have an animal for the sacrifice. And some of these people had come from hundreds of miles, so instead of traveling with a Passover offering, when you got to Jerusalem, you could purchase a sacrificial animal in the temple courtyard. Let me show you. You've seen this model of the temple before. Now, this is really misleading because you see this area here. This was all the holy space here. And these were the courtyards where people just hung out. This temple, if we set it down right here on this corner, it would stretch beyond the intersection up there. Bigger than 9 football fields. Huge. Hundreds of thousands of people could gather in these courtyards. And so people would come there, and there would be buyers and sellers here. Do y'all know how supply and demand works? When you got a lot of people suddenly there, guess what happens to the price? They were jacking up the price. It ripped Jesus up. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. These two courtyards were a very popular place for commerce and trade. But now watch this. Jews could move pretty much anywhere in here except in the Holy of Holies, but not Gentiles. They were excluded, left out. Watch this. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. You know how it is if you go to France, you have to exchange your American money. That's what was going on. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." Now don't miss this. Jesus' anger was directed to people on the inside who were denying access to the Gentiles who were on the outside. It's a great insider-outsider story. Some of you thought for decades that what ticked Jesus off was the buying and selling stuff in the church. Some of y'all have been in churches and they've said that's what set Jesus off. He had a temper tantrum. Or like one of my friends likes to say, he had a temple tantrum. Some of you attended churches and maybe they had all kind of sales, bake sales, spaghettis and barbecue dinners and chicken pie suppers and yard sales and free car washes. Have y'all seen those free car washes? Have you ever seen a free car wash that's really free? I used to tell our kids around here, we'd let y'all have a car wash if y'all would make it free, and just absolutely 100% refuse to take any money for it. We don't do fundraisers here. But not because we believe that Jesus was condemning buying and selling in church. For us, it's a matter of obedience and stewardship. There is no place in the Bible that suggests that we should sell stuff so that people who are on the outside of our community can financially support and underwrite those of us who are on the inside. So we just don't do it. Pay close attention that the ripoff wasn't bothering the people on the inside. Did you notice that? But those who were excluded on the outside were getting gypped. They were not only being cheated of some of their hard-earned money, but what was thousands of times worse is that these people were looking at a gigantic wall that kept them from the Father God, and this what drove Jesus into a rage and sent him over the edge to provide access to the Father. He would eventually have to give his life, because the cross became the bridge. And whenever religious people, whenever we build walls and boundaries and barriers, it sends him over the edge. It wasn't about people selling stuff. It was about giving everybody an all-access pass to God the Father. If you've ever been excluded by people in a church, this church, or another church, or me, I apologize. Sincerely and deeply. Most of you are familiar with John 3:16. You've read it. Maybe you used to see big posters at a sporting event. Jesus said he loved the world this way, gave his only son. Everyone who believes in him will not die but will have eternal life. But so many people have never, that's maybe the most memorized verse in all the Bible, except the Lord is my shepherd. But some people never have paid attention to the next verse, verse 17. God did not send his son into the world to condemn its people, but to open up access. He sent him to save them. God never sent Jesus for the purpose of finger pointing and angry condemnation. His mission was rescue and redemption. Access to the Father was the highest priority that Jesus ever had. And when that access was denied, it ruffled his feathers. The church leaders in Jesus' day, they were simply doing what they had been taught for generations. Clarify the religious activities, These are the things that can gain you access to God. Do what's right and you can pass the test. But there's no excuse for us to continue to do that. When did we decide that we were going to build walls and treat the people on the outside like they're the enemy? My friends, I've seen the enemy. I know the enemy. The enemy is not out there nearly as much as some of you think. The enemy is a lot closer than that. The fact is that many people that I encounter every day who are uncomfortable with Jesus, they're not uncomfortable with the Jesus that they meet on the pages of the Scriptures, but they're concerned about the Jesus that they see in me and maybe you. So in the coming weeks, we're going to prepare to meet the 21st century enemy of the Church of Jesus. If we did a quick survey, if we handed out a little survey and you filled it out, many of you probably believe that the enemy of Jesus and his church would be those issues that you see dominating the headlines and the TV news channels. So let me just go ahead and say it. The enemy that we should fear the most is not something that you're going to see this afternoon on the latest news cycle, even though those issues deserve our attention, no question. Our greatest enemy is not crime or violence. It's not poverty or inequality. It's not economics or global warming or racial tension. It's not even COVID, as difficult as all those issues are. Our greatest enemy does not exist inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. Our greatest enemy is not liberal, conservative, progressive. It's not the neighbors who live on your street or the neighbors or the people that you know where you work. I never lose sleep over any of those issues because what I know is that if God decides that it's time for the power of His Spirit to deal with it, it'll be dealt with. Our greatest enemy is not what you see on Fox or CNN or MSNBC. Have you noticed they're always giving polls and surveys? You don't have to worry about those polls and surveys because lies don't become truth and wrong doesn't become right and evil doesn't become good just because the majority of people say that. Our greatest enemy is not out there somewhere, period. Quite frankly, that should make it easier for us. You can call the enemy by several names, but our most threatening enemy is a lot closer than you think. If we become careless and lackadaisical, the enemy can destroy us. That's a drum roll. Our greatest adversaries. It's whatever we get content with. Business as usual, complacency, and indifference. A while back, I bumped into a guy. I bet you I've known this guy for 20 years. Attends a local church in Burlington. He was telling me, this conversation made no sense to me, but it is what it is. He was telling me, he said, hey, look, we hired a new pastor year before last. Have you ever met him? And I said, I don't think so. And he said, well, you need to meet him because he needs to meet the competition. And then he said, you know how it is? You know how it is, don't you? People make a choice, Coke or Pepsi. And I thought, Coke or Pepsi? And then I said, you know, last I knew we were all playing for the same team. He just went. I'm telling you, leaders can waste a lot of their otherwise productive time and energy battling enemies that do not exist. It's kind of like shadow boxing. You see me boxing? It's an invisible enemy. Meanwhile, the real problem gets ignored. The corona crisis makes it even more important because most of you are busy people and you don't have, this virus has created a situation where we don't have a lot of excess energy to waste on a battle for the soul of this world, and that just gives the enemy a greater shot at us. I thought about that conversation for a couple days, and I sent this guy the following email. Trying to reach this world for Christ is not about Coke versus Pepsi or Amazon versus Target or one church fighting against another. If you decide that another church is your competitor, that's like Coke deciding to take on Coke or Amazon battling Amazon. We don't have the energy to fight that church. It's a worthless use of our devotion and resources, but we are sincerely at a battle for the heart and soul of people who don't share our hope in Jesus. So let me quickly tell you about the people who are choosing to keep their distance from church. You can bet, this is a 100% sure bet, you can bet that the average unchurched person or dechurched person in our city, that's a person who used to be in church and now they're not. They are not laying awake on Saturday night wondering what I'm going to be preaching about today. They never think about it. They could care less. However, that same man does lay awake at night wondering if his marriage is always going to be empty and hopeless. She does lose sleep wondering if she's going to be stuck in a job that leaves her feeling unfulfilled. He is wondering if his drinking is starting to get the best of him. She is losing sleep worried about the biopsy that might not reveal great news. The average unchurched and dechurched person lies awake at night wondering if their teenagers are going to be okay. How bad is my husband's porn addiction? What kind of problem is that? What about the emptiness that I feel in my soul? Is it ever going to go away? These are all spiritual questions. Just about everybody you know is asking spiritual questions, including those who never darken the doors of a church. They just don't think that we can help. What if they're convinced that the 300 or so local churches in Alamance County are not making a difference now and never will, so they never give a church a second thought? Everybody in this town is just a couple of clicks away on their computer or smartphone to being able to hear better preachers than me. Some of y'all have probably got up early enough this morning and you've already watched another preacher who's better than me. I get that. Finding great preachers is easier than it's ever been before. Now, if you don't know one, send me a message. I'll send you a name of a couple of them. Tell you how to listen to them. You can find a church, there are churches around that have better music or more bells and whistles or maybe better coffee. I'm telling you, the coffee's pretty doggone good though, so that might be a stretch. But there is no replacement, no substitute for life-giving, authentic community, but it never happens as long as we are complacent and indifferent. That's what the Neighbors thing's all about. Around the year 1350 BC, the people of God were struggling to figure out, how are we going to get along? You know what? Their world was a lot more like ours than you can imagine. 3,370 years ago. And guess what their great risk was? It wasn't the enemies outside. Their greatest enemy was the fact that they might crumble from within. You know something? Nothing has changed. And so, it says in Judges, the book of Judges, their children grew up and did not know the Lord or what he had done for Israel. They did what the Lord said was wrong. They followed other gods and abandoned the Lord. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. It must not be that way now. Not on our watch. Jarm's coming out.